Part 1. For 4 years, I had been married to Elizabeth, the woman I believed was my soulmate. Our love story was one of those that people envied, meeting in college, falling in love effortlessly, and building a life that seemed perfect in every way. We had a solid foundation of trust, passion, and friendship. Elizabeth was my best friend. We shared everything, our hopes, dreams, and fears. Our marriage had always been full of laughter and affection, and we never went to bed angry. If someone had asked me then if I trusted her, I would have said yes without hesitation. We weren't just partners, we were a team. Our home was filled with warmth. Weekends were spent hosting dinner parties for friends, going on spontaneous road trips, or simply enjoying lazy mornings in bed. We had routines that felt comforting: Saturday morning coffee on the porch, evening walks through the neighborhood, movie nights curled up on the couch. I loved every moment of our life together. Our social life was equally fulfilling. Elizabeth had a close-knit group of friends, and we often attended gatherings with Lisa, her sister, and Donald, my younger brother. Donald had always been a bit of a drifter, moving from job to job, never quite settling down. He and Elizabeth got along well, sometimes playfully teasing each other, but I had never seen anything unusual about their relationship. Looking back, I wonder how I could have been so blind. Elizabeth had a way of making me feel like the center of her world. She always told me how lucky she was to have me, how much she appreciated our life together. Our love life was just as passionate as it had been in the beginning, and she never gave me any reason to doubt her loyalty. If anything, I felt incredibly secure in our marriage. I worked hard to give us the best life possible. My job was demanding, but it provided us with stability. Elizabeth worked in marketing and had a flexible schedule, which allowed her to have more free time than I did. I never resented it. I was happy that she had a good work-life balance. Whenever I had long hours at work, she would send me sweet messages, little reminders that she was thinking of me. I would come home to a warm meal, a glass of wine, and her arms wrapped around me. I truly believed I had everything a man could ask for. Lisa, Elizabeth's sister, often told me how lucky we were. "You two are the perfect couple," she would say. "The way you look at each other, it's like something out of a movie." Donald, my brother, had once joked, "Man, you hit the jackpot. If I ever settle down, I hope it's with someone like Elizabeth. You guys are rock solid." I had no reason to question him. No reason to see those words as anything other than admiration. I smiled, proud of what we had built. Life felt effortless. Then there were the little things I ignored, the moments I should have paid closer attention to. The way Elizabeth's phone was always on silent when we were together. The night she spent out with Lisa, coming home slightly later than usual. The times when she would get lost in thought and then brush it off as nothing when I asked. But I was happy. We were happy. And I believed that happiness was unshakable. I remember a night when we sat outside on our back patio, the glow of the string lights creating a soft, intimate atmosphere. Elizabeth leaned into me, her head resting on my shoulder. "Mark, no matter what happens in life, just know that I love you." I chuckled, kissing the top of her head. "Where's this coming from?" She sighed. "I don't know. I just want to make sure you always know." It was an odd moment, but I thought nothing of it. I assumed she was just feeling sentimental. I squeezed her hand, reassuring her. "I know, Liz. I love you too." Looking back, I should have asked more questions. I should have pressed her on why she felt the need to say something like that. But I didn't. Because I was blind. Because I trusted her completely. The days turned into weeks, and life continued as it always had. Work, home, date nights, family gatherings, it was all so normal. I had no idea that everything I knew was about to come crashing down. The truth was, I had no idea that my world was about to be shattered. That the life I thought was perfect was nothing more than an illusion, one that would soon come crashing down around me. Part 2. It started with a casual conversation over dinner one night. Elizabeth had just set down a plate of pasta in front of me, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mark, what do you think about taking a vacation? Just the two of us. Somewhere beautiful." I took a sip of my wine and smiled. "That sounds perfect. Did you have somewhere in mind?" "Hawaii," she said without hesitation. Lisa and Donald were just there last year, and they couldn't stop raving about it. I was thinking maybe we could go in a few months, before things at work get too hectic. The idea was appealing. It had been a while since we had taken a real vacation, just the two of us. With work keeping me busy and Elizabeth always juggling her projects, we hadn't had much time to truly unwind. A trip to Hawaii sounded like exactly what we needed. "Hawaii sounds incredible," I said. "We could rent a beachside bungalow, do some snorkeling, Maybe even take one of those sunset cruises. Just you and me, no distractions. She grinned, her enthusiasm contagious. Yes, I already looked up some resorts, and there's one in Maui that looks absolutely perfect. Private beaches, spa treatments, amazing restaurants. I think we deserve something special. Over the next few weeks, planning the trip became our favorite topic of discussion. Every evening after dinner, we would sit on the couch, scrolling through pictures of luxury resorts and tropical excursions. Elizabeth seemed more excited than I had ever seen her, eagerly jotting down notes and reading reviews. "Oh, Mark, look at this one. They have beachfront villas with private infinity pools," she exclaimed one night, turning her laptop screen toward me. I chuckled. "Infinity pools. You're really going all out, huh?" She nudged me playfully. "Come on, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. When was the last time we treated ourselves to something like this?" She wasn't wrong. Our last big trip had been years ago, a modest getaway to the mountains. This was different. This was paradise. One evening, as we finalized our hotel booking, Elizabeth hesitated. "You know, Lisa and Donald were asking about our trip. They're thinking of planning something around the same time." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying they want to come with us?" "Not exactly," she said, tucking her hair behind her ear. "More like, they're considering a trip to Hawaii too. Maybe we'd overlap for a few days?" I considered it for a moment. I had nothing against Lisa and Donald. Lisa and Elizabeth were close, and Donald was my brother, after all. A few days with them wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. "I mean, if they want to come for a couple of days, I guess that's fine," I said. "But I'd still like us to have plenty of time alone." Elizabeth beamed. "Of course. Most of the trip will just be us. They'd only be there for part of it." With that settled, everything started falling into place. We booked our flights, secured our reservations, and even started buying beachwear. I caught Elizabeth staring at herself in the mirror one night, holding up a new bikini. "What do you think?" she asked, striking a playful pose. I pulled her into my arms, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I think I'm the luckiest guy in the world." She giggled, wrapping her arms around my neck. "I can't wait for this trip. It's going to be unforgettable." Looking back, I should have paid more attention to the way she said that. As the departure date approached, Elizabeth's excitement only grew. She started hitting the gym more frequently, spending extra time picking out the perfect vacation wardrobe. She even bought a new perfume, something different from the one she always wore. "You're really putting a lot of effort into this trip," I teased one evening as she packed her suitcase. She smiled, but there was a flicker of something in her expression, something I couldn't quite place. "I just want everything to be perfect." Perfect. Then there were the little things. The way she seemed extra focused on her phone, texting more than usual. The way she seemed almost nervous when I walked into the room unexpectedly. I brushed it off. She was just excited. Or so I told myself. A week before the trip, we went out for dinner, celebrating our upcoming adventure. "I love you, Mark," Elizabeth said suddenly, reaching across the table to take my hand. I smiled, squeezing her fingers gently. "I love you too. Always." She looked at me, her eyes searching mine, as if she wanted to say something else. But instead, she just smiled and took a sip of her wine. I never asked what she had been thinking at that moment. Maybe I should have. Part 3. The trip to Hawaii was supposed to be the perfect escape, a time for Elizabeth and me to reconnect, to enjoy each other without the distractions of daily life. When we landed in Maui, the sun was just beginning to set, casting the sky in a blend of pinks and oranges. Elizabeth squeezed my hand as we stepped off the plane, her excitement evident in the way she practically bounced on her toes. "We made it," she said, grinning. "Paradise." Lisa and Donald had arrived earlier in the day, texting updates about their resort and how they couldn't wait to meet up. While I was fine with seeing them, I still looked forward to the days Elizabeth and I had planned alone. The first couple of days were everything I had hoped for: long walks on the beach, snorkeling in crystal-clear waters, and lazy mornings spent wrapped in each other's arms. Elizabeth seemed happy, but there were small moments, little things that didn't quite sit right with me. She would get quiet, lost in thought, then shake it off with a forced smile when I asked her what was on her mind. It wasn't until Donald and Lisa joined us that I really started to notice the change. The first time it struck me as odd was during dinner. We had found a restaurant with a breathtaking view of the ocean, and everything was going smoothly: laughs, drinks, good food. But every so often, I noticed Elizabeth and Donald exchanging looks. Not just casual glances, but something else. A flicker of familiarity. A silent conversation I wasn't a part of. I brushed it off. They had always been close. Maybe I was imagining things. But the more I watched, the more I saw. The way Donald pulled out her chair before she sat down, a little too naturally. The way Elizabeth reached for his drink by mistake, only to catch herself and laugh it off. The way they seemed to always know where the other was in the room. It was subtle, but it gnawed at me. One evening, after dinner, we all decided to walk along the shore. The waves crashed gently against the sand, the air thick with salt, and the distant sound of island music drifting from a nearby bar. Lisa and I walked ahead, talking about work and life back home. I turned back to say something to Elizabeth, only to find her and Donald lagging behind. He was whispering something in her ear, and she laughed, too soft, too intimate. A chill ran down my spine. "Hey, what's so funny back there?" I called, forcing a smile. Elizabeth looked up, startled. "Oh, nothing. Donald was just telling me about something ridiculous that happened at work." Donald smirked, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Yeah, just reminiscing." Lisa didn't seem to notice anything unusual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, as Elizabeth and I lay in bed, I turned to her. "Are you okay?" She looked at me, confused. "Of course. Why?" I hesitated. I didn't want to sound paranoid. "I don't know. You and Donald seem, I don't know, different. You've always gotten along, but it feels like there's some kind of inside joke I'm not in on." She blinked, then laughed. "Mark, don't be silly. Donald and I have known each other for years. It's nothing. Maybe I was reading into things too much. Maybe it was all in my head." But the feeling didn't go away. The next day, we spent the morning at the beach. Lisa wanted to go paddleboarding, and I volunteered to go with her while Elizabeth and Donald opted to stay on the shore. I glanced back as Lisa and I waded into the water, and there they were, Elizabeth and Donald sitting close, their heads tilted toward each other. Something twisted in my gut. Later that afternoon, I decided to test my instincts. "Hey, babe," I said casually, slipping an arm around Elizabeth's waist. "Let's go for a walk, just the two of us." She hesitated for the briefest moment before smiling. "Sure. Let me just grab my sunglasses." As she turned away, I caught Donald watching us. There was something in his expression, something I couldn't quite place. Then, more strange moments started piling up. Elizabeth took longer showers than usual, claiming she just wanted to soak in the luxury. She seemed distracted, checking her phone more than she normally did. One night, I woke up to find her missing from bed. I got up, stepping onto the balcony, and found her there, whispering into her phone. When she saw me, she quickly ended the call and smiled. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "Yeah," she said softly. "Just needed some air." I let it slide, but the nagging feeling wouldn't leave me. The final straw came when I left my sunglasses in the cabana and went back to grab them. As I approached, I heard hushed voices, Elizabeth and Donald. "We have to be careful," she was saying. "Lisa and Mark can't suspect anything." I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart hammering in my chest. I had my answer. I just wasn't ready to accept it yet. Part 4. I had to know for sure. My mind was screaming at me to stop, to turn back, to pretend I hadn't heard those words. But I couldn't. I had to see it with my own eyes. That evening, I told Elizabeth the first was going to grab drinks with Lisa at the hotel bar. She smiled and kissed my cheek, telling me to have fun. I forced myself to smile back, playing the role of the oblivious husband one last time. Then, instead of going to the bar, I waited. I sat in the shadows outside our room, heart pounding in my chest. It didn't take long. 15 minutes after I left, I saw Donald making his way toward our villa. He looked around cautiously before slipping inside. My stomach twisted into knots. I counted to 10, then followed. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open just a crack, just enough to see inside. And there it was, the truth I had been trying so hard to ignore. Elizabeth was in Donald's arms, her hands tangled in his hair, his lips pressed against her neck. She wasn't pulling away. She wasn't resisting. She was kissing him back, her body molding to his like she had done with me so many times before. Something inside me shattered. I stood frozen, watching as my wife, the woman I had trusted with everything, betrayed me with my own brother. It was surreal, like I was outside my body, watching someone else's life fall apart. Then, I did what I never thought I'd have the strength to do. I pulled out my phone and hit record. I filmed them, long enough to capture undeniable proof of what was happening. Long enough to make sure they couldn't lie their way out of it. Then, finally, I stepped inside. Elizabeth gasped and jerked away from Donald. Mark. Donald's face drained of color. It's not. Don't. Just don't. My voice was low, controlled, even though everything inside me was burning. Elizabeth stumbled forward. Mark, please. Save it, I snapped. I don't need an explanation. I don't need excuses. I saw enough. More than enough. Donald ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my gaze. It was a mistake. It won't happen again. I let out a sharp laugh. A mistake? That's what you call this? How long has this been going on? Neither of them answered. How long? I demanded, my voice rising. Elizabeth swallowed hard. It started a few months ago. It was never supposed to be anything serious. Not serious? I repeated, feeling sick. You threw away our marriage. You threw away everything we built. And for what? A fling with my brother? Donald stepped forward, his hands up. Mark, listen, No, I cut him off. You don't get to talk. You don't get to act like this is something we can fix. You're my brother. You were supposed to have my back. And instead, you did this. He had the nerve to look ashamed, but it wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough. I turned back to Elizabeth, my voice deadly calm. You disgust me. Both of you. And I promise you, this isn't staying between us. Her eyes widened. What do you mean? I held up my phone. I filmed it. I have proof. Donald swore under his breath. Mark, come on. Save it. I pushed past them and stormed out, ignoring Elizabeth's frantic calls behind me. I didn't stop walking until I reached Lisa's room. My hands were shaking as I knocked. She opened the door, surprised. Mark? What's wrong? I didn't speak. I just held out my phone and pressed play. Lisa's face morphed from confusion to horror as she watched. Her hands trembled as she covered her mouth. No, this can't be real. It's real, I said bitterly. And you deserve to know the truth. Tears welled in her eyes, but then something shifted. She clenched her jaw, her sorrow turning into anger. That bastard. That lying, cheating bastard. She looked up at me, and for the first time that night, I felt like I wasn't alone in my pain. What do we do now? She asked. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. We make them regret it. Lisa nodded, wiping her tears. They think they can get away with this? They have no idea what's coming. We spent the next few hours planning. First, I backed up the video in multiple places, ensuring I had copies ready to go if needed. Lisa, meanwhile, started gathering her own evidence, texts, odd behaviors she had noticed but ignored. I should have seen it, she murmured, shaking her head. The late nights, the secretive glances. God, I was so blind. So was I admitted. But not anymore. Morning came, and with it, our reckoning. Lisa confronted Donald first. I stood outside the door as her voice, sharp and full of fury, ripped through the walls. Donald stammered, begged, but Lisa wasn't having any of it. We're done, she spat. And trust me, everyone is going to know exactly why. As for Elizabeth, I let her squirm. She called me repeatedly, but I didn't answer. Instead, I texted her one thing. Pack your things. You're not my wife anymore. She sent paragraphs, apologies, pleas, desperate explanations. I didn't read them. I had wasted enough time on her. Lisa and I sat by the beach that night, watching the waves crash against the shore. We were both broken, but we weren't alone. They'll regret this, she said quietly. I nodded. They already do. Part 5. By the time we landed back in New York, I was a different man. Whatever part of me that had believed in love, in loyalty, and family, it was dead. I had buried it in the sand of that Hawaiian beach, right alongside any remaining affection I had once felt for Elizabeth. She sat across from me on the plane, eyes swollen from crying, but I didn't care. Every time she tried to speak, I ignored her. Every time she reached for my hand, I pulled away. The woman I had loved no longer existed. In her place was a liar, a traitor, a disgrace. Donald was in another seat, avoiding me altogether. He knew better than to try. Lisa had slapped him in front of the entire hotel lobby when she found out. I heard she smashed a bottle of champagne against his luggage before storming out. Good for her. When the plane landed, I walked ahead of Elizabeth, never once looking back. I had already planned everything out. I wasn't just going to leave her, I was going to destroy her. The first stop was the lawyer's office. I had booked an emergency appointment before we even left Hawaii. When I walked in, I handed over the video. I want the fastest, most brutal divorce possible, I told him. And I want to take everything. Elizabeth had signed a prenup when we got married. At the time, she had laughed about it, saying, Mark, we'll never get divorced. This is just a formality. Funny how things work out. My lawyer smiled. Given the circumstances, you'll get exactly what you want. The house? Yours. The cars? Yours. Her access to your bank accounts? Gone. The only thing she'll be leaving with is whatever she brought into the marriage. Perfect. File it immediately. That night, Elizabeth showed up at our house. Or rather, my house. She looked broken, mascara streaked down her face, hair unkempt. Mark, please, we need to talk. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. No, we don't. You need to pack your things and leave. She stepped forward, but I blocked her path. Mark, I made a mistake. I was weak. But I love you. I always have. We can fix this. I laughed in her face. Fix this? You think this is something we can fix? You slept with my brother. You lied to me for months. And now that you've been caught, you want forgiveness? She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Mark, please. I have nowhere to go. Not my problem. She sobbed. I'll do anything. I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't throw me away. I narrowed my eyes. You threw yourself away the moment you spread your legs for my brother. Now get out. She tried to argue, but I shut the door in her face. I locked it, listening as she pounded on the wood, screaming my name. Eventually, the knocking stopped. I never saw her again after that night. As for Donald, his fall was just as satisfying. Lisa wasn't quiet about what he had done. She told everyone. Their friends, his colleagues, even their parents. The news spread like wildfire. Donald lost everything, his reputation, his girlfriend, his job. Turns out, sleeping with your brother's wife isn't great for your career. I heard he moved out of the city, some small town where no one knew his name. Good. He deserved to rot in obscurity. Elizabeth didn't fare much better. Without my financial support, she had to move back in with her parents. She lost everything, her comfortable life, her social status, the future she had taken for granted. And the best part? Every single person in our circle knew what she had done. No one wanted to be associated with a woman who had betrayed her husband in the worst possible way. She called me a few times, left voicemails I never listened to. Then she tried texting me, desperate pleas that went unanswered. Eventually, she stopped trying. She faded into irrelevance, just like Donald. Lisa and I remained close. We had both been betrayed by the people we trusted most, and that created a bond between us. Some nights, we would sit together, sharing drinks, talking about how blind we had been. We never crossed any lines. We were just two people trying to rebuild after being shattered. One night, Lisa looked at me and said, "Do you think they regret it?" I thought about Elizabeth, probably sitting alone in her parents' tiny apartment, jobless, friendless, a shadow of the woman she once was. I thought about Donald, struggling to find work, his name tarnished beyond repair. Every single day, months passed, and I found myself standing in the doorway of my now empty home. It felt different. Free. The weight I had carried for so long was finally gone. I had won. But even as I stood there, victorious, I realized something. They had taken something from me that I could never get back. My trust. My belief in love. My faith in family. I would never be the same again. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real tragedy of it all. The end.